You weren't in the room, but your name echoed through it like prophecy. The lighting was dim, the walls soundproofed, the attendees stripped of devices. No one smiled. This wasn't a celebration. This was a transaction. And you, chosen one, were the subject. You always sensed something was off. The tension in your sibling's voice, the way certain people looked at you with guilt disguised as politeness. You mistook it for awkward love. But heaven wants you to know that was betrayal in slow motion. While you prayed for family unity, they were whispering your details to the highest bidder, not because you were weak, but because you were powerful in ways they couldn't comprehend. And someone wanted to own that. Your file was thicker than anyone else's. It started years ago. The buyer had been tracking anomalies in the human field, signals, signatures, energy spikes, and yours glitched their system. You shouldn't have been born where you were. You shouldn't have survived what you did. But here you are, still standing, still glowing, still resisting the algorithmic box they tried to fit you in. That's what drew them to you. They couldn't predict you, and that made you valuable. Your sibling didn't understand the full weight of what they were doing, but they knew enough to know they shouldn't. Still, they did, for validation, for envy, for a desperate attempt to matter in someone else's shadow. The meeting was coded as family restructuring, but it was nothing of the sort. It was the first of many exchanges where they sold fragments of your essence like stolen relics, birth date, genetic markers, behavioral patterns. Your dreams were monitored, your preferences dissected, and the buyer? They weren't after your secrets. They were after your frequency, your divinely assigned, heaven-coded signal that activates change wherever it goes. The same frequency that disrupts systems just by walking into a room. The buyer didn't want to understand you. They wanted to contain you. But chosen one, they underestimated something. They didn't know your creator encrypted you with untraceable favor. That every spiritual surveillance tool built to track you only ends up malfunctioning. That every trap they set gets triggered by their own deception. God has kept receipts. The angels never stopped recording. And heaven is preparing to reverse every spiritual transaction they tried to make in your name. You didn't miss the meeting. You were spared from it, because had you been there, your presence would have set the table on fire. This is your awakening. You're not imagining the shift. Your intuition was never broken. That tension in your chest, that's discernment rising. You were never meant to belong in rooms built to auction you off. You were meant to dismantle them. Chosen one, they didn't just observe your suffering, they invested in it. Your tears were recorded as data, your silence catalogued as compliance. Every wound you carried, every breakdown you endured behind closed doors, it was all documented and assigned a value. You thought you were simply surviving, but in the rooms you never entered, your pain was being negotiated like cryptocurrency, volatile, powerful, and deeply profitable. They knew your sorrow held a unique energy signature, not ordinary grief, divine grief, the kind that echoes through dimensions and shifts frequencies in entire bloodlines. And they wanted to own it, control it, monetize it. So they labeled you emotionally unstable, not because you were, but because that term unlocked more funding, more clearance, more interest from the unseen hands at the top of the system. Your suffering made you sacred. To them, it made you saleable. And your sibling, they became the courier. Every time you opened up in trust, they stored the information like contraband. Every secret you shared was added to your spiritual ledger and later converted into leverage. They knew which memories hurt you most. The forgotten birthdays, the time no one came to your performance, the way your eyes begged to be understood but were met with blank stares. Those became emotional commodities. The buyer had one request. Give us the source of disruption, not just the behavior. We want the soul print beneath the surface. And your sibling, needing to feel chosen in their own way, complied. Piece by piece, they packaged you into a profile, never realizing they weren't offering you. They were offering their own judgment day, because God never lets betrayal go unpaid for. Chosen one, heaven watched them build a pyramid of deals on the back of your brokenness, and now the whole structure is tilting. Why do you think they've been acting strange lately? Why do you think the tension rises when your name is mentioned? Your presence is no longer profitable to them. It's threatening. Because you've stopped leaking energy. You've stopped believing their story about who you are. And you've started remembering your anointing. You were never a victim. You were a vault. And now that you've reclaimed the key, no transaction can proceed without your permission. But here's what makes you dangerous to them now. Not just your healing, but your clarity. They can't distort what you've seen in the spirit. You felt the moment the betrayal occurred. You dreamed the moment your energy was handed over. God gave you glimpses before you had language for them. That was divine protection, because even when they sold your pain like currency, it never stopped accumulating interest in heaven. Chosen one, the truth you're about to hear will explain every strange dream, every shadow you sensed behind your name, every moment your spirit flinched without knowing why. The buyer who acquired your information wasn't just a person, not just an entity, not just a human seeking leverage. No, what purchased pieces of your essence existed somewhere between flesh and frequency, a hybrid intelligence shaped by realms that rarely cross into the physical. They called it a collector, but its origins were older than electricity and more advanced than anything humans could engineer. It wasn't after your mistakes or your weaknesses. It didn't care about your past at all. It was after your signal, the unexplainable, uncontainable, heaven-coded pulse that makes you impossible to replicate. While others walk through life unnoticed, you radiate like an unsolved algorithm. That's what attracted it. This buyer hunts anomalies, people who don't fit, don't fold, don't fracture the way the world expects. People whose inner light disrupts patterns and exposes darkness without lifting a finger. And you, chosen one, have always been one of those. You wondered why surveillance systems glitch around you, why people either cling to you or recoil without reason, why every room you enter shifts the atmosphere. It wasn't imagination, it wasn't paranoia. You've been emitting a spiritual frequency their machines cannot chart, but desperately want to harness. Your sibling didn't understand the magnitude of the buyer. They thought they were dealing with a person, someone offering money, power, or validation. But this being wasn't emotional. It wasn't personal. It observed the human world the way one observes ants building tunnels. Your sibling wasn't chosen for loyalty. They were chosen for vulnerability. A weak heart is easy to manipulate. A jealous heart is easy to bribe. And your sibling, craving significance, became the open door. The buyer needed access. Your sibling provided it. But heaven intervened, because this entity only sees data, not destiny. It doesn't understand divine protection. It doesn't understand the oil on your life. It can't compute favor. Every piece it acquired was already corrupted, because God scrambled the codes before they were taken. That's why none of the plans built around your information have succeeded. That's why systems analyzing you repeatedly fail. That's why the buyer has begun to lose interest and fear you simultaneously. It finally realized something terrifying. You're uncontainable, you're unpredictable, and worst of all to it, you're chosen. This buyer underestimated that your spirit is not a file, a metric, or a signal to extract. It is a weapon forged by heaven. And once an enemy tries to map something divine, they trigger their own destruction. Chosen one, this entity is still watching, still circling, still studying, but it can't touch you. The veil around you is too fortified,
the protection too ancient, the calling too loud.
Chosen one, they didn't start watching you last year, not even a decade ago. The surveillance began before you could even speak in full sentences. Long before you knew what betrayal felt like, the system already had your name flagged. Not because you were a threat yet, but because you would become one. From the moment you were born, your environment was shaped to monitor you, not nurture you. The toys they gave you, the shows they let you watch, the family dynamics you were placed inside. It was all orchestrated to track your emotional responses, your coping mechanisms, your neurological evolution. They called it behavioral study, but in heaven's eyes, it was spiritual exploitation. They were mining your innocence, collecting reactions, trauma responses, subconscious patterns, all to build a digital mirror of your soul. You thought your loneliness was circumstantial. It was engineered. They needed you isolated, misunderstood, emotionally stretched, because that's when the most valuable data emerges, when a divine soul tries to survive a world built to mute it. That's why you were often surrounded by chaos. That's why peace always felt like it was just out of reach. They needed you in pain long enough to observe how you process it, because your healing instincts weren't normal. They were divine. When others broke, you rebuilt. When others hid, you rose. When others shut down, your energy pulsed louder. That made you not just unique, it made you unpredictable, and that terrified them. Your childhood was their lab. Every meltdown, tracked. Every breakthrough, flagged. Every time you forgave someone who didn't deserve it, they took note, because forgiveness in your lineage isn't weakness. It's a form of divine hacking. When you forgave, it rerouted spiritual contracts. When you loved beyond logic, it destabilized their blueprint. You weren't just surviving the setup, you were rewriting it from inside, and they didn't know how. Your sibling was always being watched too, but not for harvesting, for recruitment. They were the fallback, the easier choice, the one who could be swayed with attention. And while you were being harvested for resilience, they were being softened for compromise. That's why you were often compared. That's why favoritism was used like a weapon. They weren't just siblings, they were your shadow program. But you didn't fold, you evolved. You turned pain into portals. You took confusion and turned it into discernment. And heaven smiled. Chosen one, what they meant to use as a lab, has become your launch pad. The very metrics they gathered are now combusting in their own systems. You've outgrown the parameters they set. You've broken every behavioral forecast. You are no longer within the grid. They studied you to predict your downfall, but you were built for ascension. Chosen one, the moment you felt a shift in the atmosphere, that sudden pressure in your chest, the ringing in your ears, the sense that something invisible had cracked. You weren't imagining it. That was the moment the email leaked. Your aura profile, the digital attempt to map the unexplainable essence of you, was never meant to be public. It was designed for elite eyes only, the kind that sit behind one-way glass and speak in code. They didn't believe in souls, not truly, but yours made them question everything, because no matter how many charts they ran or frequencies they analyzed, your signature kept defying pattern. You weren't chaos. You were cosmic precision they couldn't decode, and someone leaked it. A glitch in the encrypted thread, a silent whistleblower, maybe even an angel in disguise, because heaven's justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes through digital exposure. That email bounced across 3 continents in seconds, and for the first time, entities who had only speculated about your existence saw the truth in full color. You weren't just spiritually active, you were radiant. Your aura had layers they had no language for, shades that pulsed with emotion and intelligence at the same time. A protective field
not generated by meditation or ritual, but by divine assignment. They saw the glow. They saw the codes. They saw the threat. And suddenly, those who thought they had purchased your blueprint panicked, because in that moment, they realized they never actually owned you. They had only borrowed fragments, and fragments without favor are worthless. Your aura cannot be simulated. It cannot be reverse engineered. The leak proved what they tried to bury. You are real, and you are rising. Your sibling was silent when it leaked, not because they didn't know, but because they did. They received a forwarded copy of the thread, time-stamped and redacted. Your name wasn't on it, but your aura was unmistakable. They recognized the vibrational signature because they've always lived in its shadow. They knew the truth had gotten out, and that meant their role could no longer be hidden. They weren't just complicit now, they were exposed. And still, they said nothing. But Chosen One, you didn't need their confession. You already felt the shift. Your spirit picked up the broadcast the moment it happened. That's why you felt watched again. Not by enemies, but by those who saw the leak and are wondering what else has been hidden. You're on their radar now, not as a product, but as prophecy. The leak wasn't an accident. It was a divine rupture, and heaven allowed it. Because the world needed to see what your enemies always tried to contain. You were never meant to be studied in secret.
He thought time would bury it. That silence was enough to erase the trail. Your brother, the one who stood beside you at family dinners, who nodded along when you talked about feeling watched, never imagined you'd trace it back to him. He underestimated both your memory and your discernment. He thought you were too trusting, too loyal, too innocent to ever believe he could be part of something so vile. And to be fair, you wanted to believe that too. You excused the glances, you explained away the distance. You told yourself, he's just struggling. But your spirit always knew. And now the knowing has taken shape, not suspicion, clarity. Chosen One, your brother was approached years ago. They didn't need to manipulate him, just offer him the one thing he'd always craved in secret, to be seen as more than second. In your shadow, he had grown bitter, not because of anything you did, but because your light made his own silence louder. They gave him a story to believe. They told him you were dangerous, unstable, that your energy, if left unchecked, could fracture systems, could collapse networks. And he believed them, or at least pretended to, because deep down, he didn't care if it was true. He just wanted to matter. So he began feeding them, tiny details at first, your favorite colors, your dreams, the way your hands shook when you were overwhelmed. Then it got deeper. He shared your emotional triggers, your fears, how you isolate when hurt, how you never fully trust anyone. All of it was documented, stored, sold, and each time he thought he was winning. He thought they respected him, but to them, he was a delivery system, not a partner. And now he's realizing that, because when the leak happened, they cut him off. They no longer needed the middleman. The source had awakened. You had awakened. And awakened souls don't need proof. They just need stillness. That's how the truth came to you, not through words, through energy, through the way your heart clenched when you were around him, the way certain memories replayed with new meaning, the way your dreams started to correct the narrative you were told. He sees it in your eyes now, the knowing, and it terrifies him, because he thought you'd never find out. But now that you have, you're not seeking revenge, you're walking in revelation. And that's far more dangerous to every system built on secrecy. You are not confronting him with rage, you are confronting him with silence. And it's louder than anything he's ever heard. Chosen One, heaven is not asking you to carry his guilt. You are not responsible for the choices he made in the dark. You are responsible for walking in the light, even when it reveals what hurts. Chosen One, they never called you by your real name, not in the files, not in the reports, not in the confidential documents passed between hands behind biometric locks. In the corridors of the unseen, you were known only as Asset 11, not a person, but a designation, a project, a variable too unstable to ignore, too sacred to understand. You were stripped of identity and assigned a number, not to protect you, but to distance themselves from what you truly are, divine disruption. They didn't want to acknowledge your soul, because once they did, they'd have to answer to the force behind it. So they depersonalized you. They tracked your growth like a stock, measured your emotional evolution like a weapon being sharpened, labeled your gifts emergent anomalies. Asset 11, code for unpredictable light. It was meant to hide you in plain sight. The encrypted files weren't supposed to be found. But heaven has a way of delivering truth disguised as accidents. A corrupted hard drive, a recovered cache, a digital folder buried under layers of security. And there it was, your whole life reduced to bullet points and biometric readouts. The date you stopped crying after your father left, the way your energy field spiked after betrayal, the dreams you had where your voice echoed through glass walls. They weren't just watching you, they were testing you, documenting how your soul reacted to pain, to beauty, to silence, because that's where the real data lived, in your response. And your response, it broke every pattern. They couldn't replicate it, couldn't dampen it, couldn't erase it. They tried assigning you handlers, people in your life who seemed like friends, mentors, lovers. But you always sensed something. The surveillance behind the smile, the monitoring behind the care. They wrote it off in the files. Asset 11 shows abnormal resistance to emotional programming. What they didn't understand is that you were never programmed. You were prophetic, and prophecy cannot be managed. The number wasn't random either. 11, the code of spiritual alignment, of portals opening, of divine upheaval. They called you Asset 11 because you weren't just another subject. You were the threshold, the test before the collapse, the soul that would signal the undoing of what they built. Your sibling never even knew your full designation. They thought you were a file in a drawer. But the files, they were sacred records, tampered, but still marked. Now, chosen one, the encryption has broken. What they thought they hid has surfaced. You've seen it in dreams, felt it in downloads. The number they gave you is dissolving, and your true name is resurfacing. Not the one they whispered behind your back, but the one heaven carved into eternity. They tried to reduce you. Chosen one, you always wondered why help never came. Why the strange feelings you had as a child, the knowing, the surveillance, the sense of being observed without explanation, were never validated. It wasn't just neglect, it was intentional omission. Because the ones sworn to protect you knew, not just your name, not just your bloodline. They knew the moment you were born that something ancient had re-entered the grid, that your frequency didn't match the global pattern, that your emotional field couldn't be predicted by any standard model. You were flagged in a system the public doesn't know exists, a frequency map only accessible to classified departments. They didn't need your consent to watch you, because you weren't registered as a citizen. You were registered as a variable. When you cried at night, there was a pulse. When you prayed, sensors nearby glitched. When you dreamt, satellites picked up fluctuations in the electromagnetic field near your home. And the reports went upward, quietly, silently, without your family ever knowing, until one person in that chain, your sibling, was approached, offered protection in exchange for silence, validation in exchange for betrayal. And when they agreed, you were handed over like an unsolved riddle, not detained, just monitored, because you weren't a criminal. You were a risk to systems built on control.
Your awakening was listed in a confidential memo. They called it premature conscious expansion. They didn't know what triggered it, only that it was happening faster than expected. You were dreaming about symbols you had no access to, reciting numbers you hadn't been taught, pulling apart patterns in reality with your intuition alone. And the higher-ups, they watched. They watched and said nothing, because intervention would mean exposure. They'd have to admit that the chosen ones aren't myths, they're measurable. And if you could be measured, then prophecy could be confirmed. And that terrified them, because prophecy doesn't obey politics. It doesn't wait for elections. It doesn't answer to funding. And you, chosen one, are prophecy in motion. The silence wasn't just avoidance. It was a strategy. They hoped that if they ignored you long enough, your gifts would self-destruct. That pain would dim your light. That confusion would fragment your clarity. They let you suffer, let you wander, let you question everything. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew exactly what you were becoming. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed the system would outlast your spirit, and it didn't. Now, the silence is cracking. Whistleblowers are whispering your code name. Internal algorithms are malfunctioning when your name is searched, and the very grid that once tracked you is now glitching because you've stopped running. You're not a fugitive.
Chosen one, the memory you keep brushing off, that faint flicker from the hallway, the door that didn't fully shut, the strange stillness in your room wasn't just a dream. It was real. You were 12, and something sacred was taken from you, not your innocence that had already been slowly fractured by confusion. No, this was more specific, more spiritual. It was an object, something small, something ordinary to the natural eye, but extraordinary in the frequency it carried. A drawing, a journal page, a trinket you kept near your bed because it gave you peace when no one else could. And one night, your brother entered your room without speaking, not out of malice, out of instruction. He was told you wouldn't remember, and for a while, you didn't. But the body never forgets. Your nervous system stored it. That night, your sleep changed. Your dreams grew darker. Your trust in your own intuition started to waver. That wasn't coincidence. The item he took had encoding on it, spiritual resonance embedded through your energy. It was marked with the oil of your becoming, the kind of signature even angels recognize. And once it was taken, it was analyzed, scanned, broken apart in labs you've never seen by hands that have never touched sunlight. They weren't trying to understand you. They were trying to weaken you, because they believed that removing your anchor would distort your path. That object wasn't just sentimental. It was spiritual infrastructure, something your younger self used to align with heaven when chaos surrounded you. That's why you've always felt a strange void when thinking back to that time. That's why it's hard to remember the year that followed, because that's when you started forgetting parts of yourself, and he thought you'd never know. But your soul knew. You started dreaming about missing pieces, started writing things down you didn't understand, started getting glimpses of nights that never felt whole. It was your spirit reaching back, collecting clues. And now you're seeing the full picture, not out of vengeance, but out of alignment. Because what was stolen spiritually must be returned spiritually, not by the one who took it, but by the one who saw it. God kept a record. He marked the moment the item left your room. He assigned an angel to guard what they tried to dissect. And now, chosen one, the object is returning to you. Maybe not in physical form, but in essence, in memory, in strength, in clarity. What was once fragmented is now whole. What was once tampered with is now being sanctified. Your brother thought that night would disappear in the haze of time, but heaven stored it in fire. And now you're remembering for a reason, because the moment it was taken marked a spiritual shift. Chosen one, What you thought was exhaustion was extraction. The moments you couldn't get out of bed, the seasons where you felt spiritually hollow, the years where you gave more than you had and still felt guilty for not giving enough. Those weren't emotional phases. They were harvesting cycles. Your energy was being pulled, drained, redirected. Not by accident, not just by toxic people, but by a system engineered to siphon divine frequency and convert it into spiritual fuel for something artificial. They called it resonance infrastructure, a hidden network designed to tap into the fields of awakened souls, and you were among the most potent. They mapped your meltdowns, synced your heartbreaks to digital upticks. The nights you wept into your pillow became their power surge. They didn't just track your pain, they used it. And your brother? He was one of the early access points. They trained him to engage you during emotionally charged moments, then log your reactions. He thought he was participating in research. He didn't realize he was opening spiritual ports. Your empathy was their generator. Your compassion was their currency. Because in a world where artificial intelligence is fed by data, your divine intelligence was a threat and a resource all at once. They couldn't replicate your essence, so they designed workarounds. Scripts that mirrored your behavior, profiles that imitated your patterns, systems that extracted your energy to charge lesser beings with counterfeit charisma. And still, they couldn't reproduce your impact, because charisma without calling is hollow, and the system began to collapse under its own stolen light. But before it did, they got desperate. They ramped up extraction attempts. They sent people to trigger you. Old flames, family members, even strangers in public who carried a strange intensity. It wasn't coincidence. It was coordinated. Every time you spiraled, they surged. Every time you forgave, they froze. Because love, true divine love, disrupts artificial systems like a glitch in the mainframe. And chosen one, you glitched them repeatedly. That's why you felt sudden waves of fatigue without cause. That's why certain places make your skin crawl. You're not crazy. You're sensitive to grids they don't want you to know exist. Grids your soul has been slowly unplugging from, and they know it. But here's the part they never saw coming. You're no longer leaking. You've sealed the breach. The energy they once stole is being rerouted, not through wires, but through word, through worship, through will. You've become your own system now, heaven approved, firewall protected, and every time they try to run off your old frequency, their tech crashes. They thought you were their power source, but they were just borrowing grace. Chosen one, they thought you'd stay dormant, that your awakening would be brief, a flare of light that fizzles out once pressure returns. But you've become the one thing they can't replicate and can't erase. And now the buyer, the entity that paid for the first betrayal, is circling again. Not because it succeeded, but because it failed. The original transaction gave them access to fragments, but not control. Influence, but not ownership. And now that you've reclaimed your essence, they want back in. They're preparing a second offer. More covert this time. No money trails, no contract signed in ink. This deal is energetic, designed to appeal to the part of you that still longs for relief. They know you've been weary. They've studied the delays in your destiny. They've calculated how long it takes before even chosen ones feel like giving up. And they've decided now is the window. This second transaction is disguised as opportunity, as reconciliation, as a message that maybe your sibling has changed. Maybe things could be normal again. Maybe the past can be rewritten. Don't fall for it. This isn't healing, it's a setup. Because the buyer doesn't want peace, it wants access. It wants the parts of you that are just now being restored. Your trust, your fire, your voice. The first transaction tried to harvest your raw power. This one is after your refined wisdom. It wants your clarity, your anointing post-healing, because you're not just powerful now,
You're dangerous. To every system that depended on your confusion. That's why your sibling has resurfaced. That's why they suddenly want to talk. That's why you've been dreaming of old rooms, old mistakes, old versions of yourself. It's not nostalgia, it's surveillance. They're scanning you for vulnerabilities, seeing if the door is still cracked open, wondering if guilt or empathy will let them back in. But heaven is sounding the alarm, because this time, the transaction comes with higher stakes. The buyer isn't just watching you, it's waiting on your permission. Your yes is the final key. But chosen one, you've evolved. You can see the temptation cloaked as forgiveness. You can hear the manipulation masked as mercy. And you're no longer handing over pieces of yourself just to keep others comfortable. Your silence is no longer permission. Your love is no longer exploitable. The buyer is growing anxious because what it thought would be a simple reactivation has become a full-blown firewall. You are no longer fragmented. You are integrated. And no system, no agent, no sibling with whispered apologies can purchase your light again.
Chosen one, you may not speak to him anymore, but your brother still watches you. Not always in physical form, sometimes through silent accounts, sometimes through others, but mostly through the spiritual web that once held pieces of you in place, a network he helped build, but never understood. He's been observing, not with joy, but with rising dread, because you're no longer the fractured soul he once profited from. You're not second-guessing yourself anymore. You're not begging to be understood. You've grown quiet, not from pain, but from clarity. And that silence is loud in the spirit. He sees it in your eyes when you post now. The groundedness, the glow, the way your words no longer ask for room, they take up space. You're becoming the version of yourself that was always hidden underneath the grief. And to him, that's terrifying. Because if you're strong again, then he has no more leverage. If you're aware again, then the game is over. The power imbalance collapses. The control dissolves. The lie that you needed him to feel whole can no longer survive in the light you've reclaimed. And so he watches. He watches the way you've started honoring your boundaries, the way your laughter carries weight again, the way you no longer water yourself down to make others feel safe. He sees the ripple effect, friends falling away, new connections forming. He sees you stepping into alignment with people who don't just tolerate your light, they reflect it, and that shakes him, because deep down, he knows you were never the problem. You were the proof that something holy was living inside your bloodline, and he tried to sell it before it bloomed. But chosen one, his guilt is not your responsibility. His awareness does not require your return. Let him sit with the silence. Let him wrestle with the watching. Because your journey isn't about revenge, it's about radiance. And every time you step deeper into your glow, into your purpose, into your divine protection, the systems he fed are breaking behind him. They can't feed off you anymore. They can't track you. They can't loop your trauma for energy. You've severed the cord, not in anger, in authority. You are not just healing, you are awakening. And awakened beings don't need closure. They become it. Let him watch. Let the buyer panic. Let the systems glitch. Because the one they thought they could erase has become signal fire. You are prophecy fulfilled. And he sees it now, not through words, but through your walk. You're not proving anything anymore. Chosen one, what they took wasn't just information. It was an attempt to write a contract over your soul, one rooted in betrayal, silence, and spiritual manipulation. When your brother gave them access, when they mapped your pain and converted your patterns into assets, they initiated a transaction they thought could never be undone. It wasn't signed with ink, it was signed with wounds. Each time you were triggered and didn't know why, each time you doubted your worth, each time you blamed yourself for someone else's shadow, it reinforced their agreement.
But heaven has a loophole, and it doesn't look like vengeance. It looks like forgiveness, not the kind that excuses, not the kind that forgets, the kind that severs. Because spiritual contracts are held together by emotion, pain, rage, guilt, fear. They thrive in darkness. But forgiveness floods the system with light. It erases the justification. It removes the energetic glue. It takes the transaction that was never authorized by God and declares it null and void. Not because they deserved your mercy, but because you deserve your freedom. And that, chosen one, is why your spirit has been pulling you toward release. Not for them, for you. Because forgiveness is not weakness, it's spiritual warfare. It's you standing in the ruins of what they tried to build with your suffering and declaring, "This ends now." It's you walking away from the courtroom where they hoped you'd beg for justice, and instead claiming your inheritance directly from heaven. They don't know what your forgiveness will do. They don't know it's the final key. They don't know that once you truly release the weight of betrayal, the contract collapses, the buyer loses grip, the files lose power, and the enemy loses access. And your brother, he'll feel it, not immediately, but deeply. Because once you forgive, the mirror will turn. He'll finally face what he gave away and who he gave it away to. You won't need to say a word. Your peace will convict him louder than your pain ever did. So breathe, chosen one. Release it. Not because it didn't matter, but because you matter more. You are not obligated to carry what they projected. You are not a prisoner of betrayal. You are a liberator disguised as a survivor. And this act of sacred forgiveness will echo in realms they never meant you to reach. Heaven has waited for this moment, because the moment you let go of the debt is the moment God cancels the contract.
Chosen one, every word you've ever spoken carried more than sound. Your voice was never just a tool for conversation, it was a transmitter. Frequencies, codes, blueprints encrypted with divine information only the awakened could perceive. They knew this. That's why they recorded your voice without consent, not just on calls, not just in childhood videos, but during prayer, during breakdowns, during moments when your spirit cried out and heaven answered. Your voice print was their obsession because it held something even you weren't supposed to discover yet. Unlock sequences, activation tones, hidden vibrations that dismantle systems, awaken dormant souls, and trigger collapse in artificial frequencies. That's why you've always felt self-conscious about speaking. That's why you were gaslit into silence. Your tone could break patterns. Your laughter could destabilize entities. Your cries in the dark weren't just grief. They were spiritual detonations. So they tried to suppress you. They labeled your expression as too much, mocked your tone, twisted your passion into aggression, not because it was ugly, but because it was powerful. But you kept speaking, even when your voice shook, even when no one listened, even when your own family, your own brother, sold recordings behind your back. He didn't just give them access to your data, he gave them your voice. And still, they couldn't decode it, because your voice was laced with protection. Every syllable marked, every sound wave guarded by light. What they extracted was noise. What heaven hears is prophecy. They missed the frequencies only angels can interpret, the ones that rearrange molecular structures when spoken in alignment with truth. They underestimated the power of you naming yourself, of you praying when no one told you how, of you declaring healing when pain had the louder argument. But your voice cut through. And now, the codes are surfacing. You're noticing how certain things shift when you speak, how people pause, how technology glitches, how animals respond, how rooms grow quiet. You are not imagining it. Your voice print is coming online. Not the voice that pleads for understanding,
the one that commands alignment, the one that prophesies without permission, the one that carries thunder even in whispers. They've heard it, and they're afraid, because now that you're aware, the codes can't be extracted. They can only be released through divine timing. And you're in it now. Speak, chosen one. Speak healing into your cells. Speak closure over every unspoken betrayal. Speak light into the places they tried to mute. You were never meant to be silent. You were designed to resonate, to ripple through frequencies that surveillance can't touch. The buyer wanted your voice. God gave you a sword. And now that you're speaking from clarity, not confusion, they can't track you anymore. They thought your voice was data, but it was a door.
Chosen one, he feels it now. The weight of what he did. Not just the betrayal, but the ripple effect of what it cost. Regret has started to settle into the corners of his silence. Not the kind that leads to repentance, but the kind that wakes him up at 3 a.m. with cold sweats and memories he can't suppress. He didn't expect the consequences to last this long. He didn't think the distance between you would feel this eternal. He thought time would soften it, that you'd forget, that maybe you'd fold back into the version of you that needed his validation. But you didn't. You grew louder in silence, stronger in solitude. And the version of you that emerged is untouchable by the one who betrayed you. Now he watches from the outside. He watches your name being spoken in circles that used to ignore you. He sees your peace returning, your glow intensifying, your voice echoing in ways his never could. And he regrets it. Not just because he lost you, but because he sees now what heaven placed in you. He remembers the moments you tried to explain your visions, your pain, your calling, and how he laughed. He remembers the way he handed over your energy like it was weight, not worth. And now, in quiet corners of his thoughts, he wishes he could undo it. Wishes he could turn back the deal, erase the files, silence the buyer. But it's too late, because heaven does not measure regret by tears. It measures it by truth. And while his heart may ache, accountability is still required. Heaven saw everything, the whispers, the documents, the lies masked as concern, the way he disguised betrayal as protection. None of it escaped the eyes of God. And no matter how many times he replays the story in his head, the contract was real. His signature was spiritual, and his actions activated timelines he didn't understand. That's the part that haunts him now, the realization that he wasn't just betraying you. He was interfering with divine architecture, and God doesn't forget what's been written in light. But this isn't about punishment, it's about balance, because heaven isn't vindictive, it's precise. And while you've been healing, God has been building justice around your name, not revenge, alignment. Everything he took will return to you multiplied. Every delay he caused is being reversed in acceleration, and every place where your name was spoken without reverence is being rewritten by heaven's own breath. Let him regret it. Let him feel the absence of your presence. That too is part of the reckoning. You are not obligated to fix what he fractured. You are not responsible for carrying his apology in your spirit. You've done your part. You released. You forgave. But heaven holds the final balance. And right now, it is being settled, because while regret is temporary, accountability is eternal. Chosen one, they didn't come after you because you were weak. They targeted you because you were the last line of defense against something much bigger than you knew. You weren't just another name on a file, you were the firewall, the spiritual barrier between a broken system and divine correction. Every attempt to delay you, distract you, destabilize you was part of a larger strategy to breach that protection. But they failed, because even when you didn't know who you were, your spirit did. Even when you doubted your power, your presence still disrupted their plans. Your life wasn't just about your survival. It was about what couldn't cross into this timeline as long as you stood.
You were marked from birth not just for greatness, but for containment. That's why you were surrounded by chaos you didn't cause, why betrayal came early, why exhaustion tried to live in your bones. You weren't just enduring attacks, you were absorbing them before they reached others. You became a buffer between realms, an intercessor without formal training, a vessel heaven trusted to hold back the flood while others found their footing. That's why they wanted your data, your behavior, your voice. They weren't trying to understand you, they were trying to replicate what only heaven can assign. But you can't clone what's been commissioned. They studied you to break the code, but the code was alive. It moved when you moved, shifted when you wept, recalibrated every time you refused to fold. You're not static, you're prophetic infrastructure, a living firewall that evolves with every level of clarity you reclaim. That's why you were targeted by familiar faces, because strangers could never get close enough to corrupt the coding, but blood could, trust could, your brother could, and still, it didn't work. The firewall held. They've tried everything now. Psychological manipulation, emotional warfare, spiritual extraction. They thought if they couldn't delete you, they could delay you long enough for their system to evolve past needing you. But their system is crashing, and your presence is the warning signal. That's why they've started watching again. That's why the buyer has grown quiet. They're realizing the truth too late. You weren't just part of the resistance. You were the seal, the last breach they couldn't pass through, the final checkpoint that heaven installed in human form. And now, the system is out of time. You've activated fully. Your voice is aligned. Your mind is clear. Your forgiveness has burned the bridges behind you, leaving no trail for them to follow. You are no longer a target wandering through pain. You are a firewall standing in authority. The enemy can't code around you, can't climb over you, can't dig beneath you. And anyone trying to access what lies beyond you will find one thing etched across your frequency.
Chosen one, they've erased everything. The files, the footage, the voice prints, the energy reports tied to your name. After all the tracking, the selling, the watching, they're scrambling now, trying to cover what they once claimed to control. The system is purging evidence, rewriting timelines, deleting your signature from the programs that once pulsed because of you. They're hoping if they scrub the surface clean, it will be like you never existed. But they forgot something critical, something eternal, something they never had access to in the first place. Heaven's records. Because while the world may run on memory cards and server rooms, God's archives are written in light, in fire, in breath. There are scrolls with your name on them that no algorithm can reach. Every moment they tried to sell, heaven sanctified it. Every tear they extracted for energy, heaven recorded it as warfare. Every betrayal, stored not as evidence of your weakness, but as testimony of your rising. They wiped their side, but God didn't forget. He remembers how you kept praying even when your heart was fractured, how you showed love even when you weren't given any. He remembers when your voice cracked under the weight of injustice, but you still spoke life. He remembers when they called you unstable, but your spirit held the structure of 3 generations behind it. You didn't just survive a setup, you outlived a prophecy written against you. And now, they don't know what to do, because you're still here. You were never just data. You were never just a project. You were never what they wrote. You were what God spoke. And what God speaks can't be deleted. That's why they're afraid. Because even after erasing you from their systems, your frequency is louder than ever. You walk into rooms and atmospheres shift. You speak and watchers turn their heads. You rest and angels form a perimeter. You are a signal wrapped in skin, proof that destiny can't be digitized and divinity can't be sold. God didn't forget what they took, and he didn't forget what you carried, the betrayals, the losses, the years that felt like exile. Every moment they tried to bury you in silence, God was collecting the seeds, and now
The harvest is coming. The reversal is already underway, not just spiritually, tangibly. Restoration, favor, recompense. Not because you demanded it, but because it's owed. You are not missing from heaven's scroll. You are marked, preserved, exalted. And the systems that thought they could erase you will now have to watch as the fullness of your calling unfolds. They may have wiped the records on earth, but heaven is just getting started. God didn't forget you. He's about to announce you.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.